Talk Funny.
It's Talk Funny, a podcast by Mark Bailey and comics from all over. Brought to you by Nagoyacomedy.com. Talk Funny. Thanks for your requests. But here's Mark Bailey anyway.
And we're back with Talk Funny. I'm Mark Bailey, and today's guest / co-host is Steve B. Howard. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks for having me on, Mark.
We'll talk about Steve. Steve is a published author, and we'll talk about that in some future podcasts. But Steve is doing comedy with us, and talk about how you got started doing comedy with us. It's kind of an interesting story.
Well, actually, I told a really stupid joke to Mike Miller one day. We were just walking to a bar, I think it was, and he said, "You ought to try stand-up." And so they had an open mic and at GC Live, and I got up there and did about 2.5 minutes and got a couple of laughs. And then Mark contacted me via Facebook, I think, and invited me to do their show at Shooters. And I did about 5.5 minutes at that show and got a lot of laughs. So from there on, I just kind of kept doing shows with them.
Yeah, Steve's kind of a success story. We don't always have success stories with open mic. Sometimes we have disasters. But Steve is a success story that started with open mic and followed the rules, and then gets paid, as Mike and I said before, paid pejorative term, paid by the universe to do comedy. And, I mean, we do get paid, but it's nothing to brag about. But compared to from what I hear, most of the comics that are also doing stand-up in Japan, they're not getting paid. They put it into a fund. We're actually getting paid, and it's very important to me that we get paid, even if it's 200 yen a person, because it keeps you writing and it keeps you motivated to show up. Otherwise, it's just a hobby, and how many things have I started and then not finished because they were hobbies and didn't pay, right? So.
Yeah, and I can say without a doubt that I've never actually had to spend the night in the subway station because I didn't have enough money to make it home after one of our shows. So.
Right. Well, that's because I always make sure we catch the trains, but that's another rule that I try to enforce. But you knocked me off my guard at the beginning. You said something about you and Mike are walking to a bar? This doesn't...
yeah, sorry.
Comedians are walking to a bar?
Yeah. I think we were intending to drink some alcohol, possibly even.
Were the convenience stores closed, or?
Yeah.
So that's a running inside joke with us. The comics in Nagoya, as you know, prices of food and drinks are very expensive at most bars, and if you get paid 800 yen for a fairly good turnout, you get paid 800 yen. You can either get a Big Mac, you can't even get a whole set, right? So you have to hang out in convenience stores because they're convenient and they're also cheap. So what surprised you most when you started doing comedy with us? Be nice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for my own stuff, just how much you actually have to learn. I mean, it's I guess the old cliche, you don't know what you don't know until you actually get up there and do it. But, I mean, I've been doing it for a little over 2 years now, and just every time I get on stage, I'm learning more and more. But I think one of the biggest things that I've started to sort of pay attention to now is giving the audience a chance to actually decide whether they're going to laugh at your jokes or not. Because
right.
I had a bad tendency, I think, when I started to rush into my next joke, and either the audience didn't laugh at the punchline at the previous joke, or they'd be in the middle of actually laughing at my punchline, and I'd be going in the next joke. So timing and pausing and stuff like that is, I realize, is really critical to doing good stand-up.
Yeah, we've always talked about doing comedy workshops, but nobody really shows up when we hold them. So, so I'll just say this on the podcast. One of the things that people that aren't comics don't understand is the biggest part of being a comic when you're on stage is listening. You listen to how it went over. Like you'll tell a joke and then they'll laugh at the wrong part of it, and you're like, well, they didn't even get the witty part of it. So next time I'm gonna have to build up to the witty part so they understand the punchline's still coming. A lot of times on the Nagoya audiences, they're foreign and they're expat, and they'll laugh at the premise sometimes.
Yeah. And
then they're laughing during your punchline. It's like, my joke was actually much better than you gave me credit for if you just listen, right? So comics, a lot of times we have to listen. I think a lot of people maybe think, that even the audience, like they see me setting up 10 different, I had little pads, and these cheap pads I get in the States, and I set them up on these little cheap, clips, and I record them from different angles because a lot of them, some of them will pick up the bad sound, and some of them aren't charged, and out of 10, I exaggerate, it's not 10, it's like 4, and usually I'll have one good documented film of my act, and I play it back and I listen sometimes to see like what the hecklers did, because at the time I'm too focused. to deal with them sometimes, but I'll listen to the hecklers, and sometimes I'll listen to how an audience reacted to something, and something that I thought was really funny went completely over their heads.
Yeah.
And that's very important, is to, you listen when you're on stage, but I also listen when I go back and listen to it. And then you can, we have the disadvantage that we do about one show a month at the most, 1 to 2 max. And in the States, you could do like 78. If you're in Pittsburgh, you could do a bunch of the strip mall comedy shops in Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And if you make a weekend out of it, you could actually probably do 14 gigs in a weekend, even with open mic.
Yeah.
And we don't have that much chance to try out our material. So I had one time in Toyohashi, somebody criticized us, and they said, "Well, you're trying stuff out on stage." Yeah, what do you think we're on stage for?
Right.
We're not ready for Vegas.
Yeah.
You're Toyohashi, you're not Vegas.
Yeah.
You think if I was ready for Vegas, you think I'd be in Japan?
Well, the one that what really struck me was the documentary that Seinfeld did after his show went off the air, and he decided to come back to doing stand-up for a while, and he did the documentary, and in the middle of it, he'd been doing pretty much the same material, like 40 minutes of material every night for 6 months, and he got interviewed, and he goes, "Yeah, I think my stuff's just about ready now to maybe I can do a special here." And I'm like, this is one of the greatest comedians in the world.
Right.
He's doing the same material for 6 months, 40 minutes of the same material for 6 months. In our case, like Mark mentioned, and I think Mike, when he was on here, they mentioned too, if we're lucky, we might do the same material maybe twice, maybe 3 times a year, because if we do the same material every time, we're probably not going to have an audience, because they'll probably have all heard it. So, our stuff may not come out as polished as what you'd expect from a famous comedian, but it's because we're writing 10 minutes of new material every month.
Yeah, it's what I've tried to. That's what Mike and I were talking about earlier. Is sometimes when we'll invite people, they'll say, "Are you doing new stuff?" And I tell them we're always doing new stuff every month. Otherwise, that's got to be our selling point, is new stuff every month. And we're writing all the time. We're actually, as I said when Mike was on, we're writing about 10 to 12 times faster, more accelerated than comics in the States have to do. There's no aspersion on comics in the States. They don't write 12 times as fast as they do, because they don't have to. They write as much as they need, and then they tour and they go. You can go. Some of the guys, Ari Shaffir is going to East Coast and West Coast. That you can use the same material, 200 clubs, and nobody's ever heard it before, because they're all different audiences. And for us to do that, we have to go to different cities, and there's just very few cities that we can go to and still come back to our day job. So yeah, it's all new material, and that's one of the things when I started booking this, is I told all the comics, every month you got to write new material every day, and every month try a new set out. And kind of the way, Seinfeld, he's a wordsmith, and he has to have the nuance and everything, and everything has to be perfect. We can't afford that. We don't have time for that. So the way I see it is, we're kind of basically doing, like when Adam Carolla does live podcasts, that's basically what our show is. We're doing radio on stage. Mm-hmm. We're doing, and because radio, once I say my stupid pun, it's out there, and either it worked or it didn't work. Yeah. And with radio, I don't even have feedback, so I don't even know if people are laughing, because the jingle guy is sitting there, he doesn't understand English, and he frowns. He frowns especially hard when I'm having a good time. When I laugh at my own joke, he frowns. He doesn't understand what's going on. So we're testing things out, but that's actually fun to watch. For me, that's fun to watch, because you're watching the sausage being made. Uh-huh. And as a comic nerd, it's really interesting to me. And then when I watch some sets of some of you other guys or my own, I'll say, I'm going to probably not do that ever again. I'm not going to do that bit ever again. It was too much of a build-up, and nobody got it. And it doesn't even mean that it wasn't funny. It's just, every audience, you have to tailor it to them. Some of them are waiting for sexual innuendos, and they'll only laugh at that, or only flatulence jokes. Yeah. And you have to get to know the crowd while you're on stage, and you only have 10 minutes to get to know them. Yeah. So it's very tricky, and people think, you just get up and you tell your jokes. We're actually listening. I'm listening to everything. That's why, I'm listening to who's laughing, and I find who's laughing in the audience. I kind of, cater to them. I find who's not laughing, and I'm thinking, what's this person's problem anyway? And then the guy, what is that maraca sound? This is driving me nuts. So we've been heckled by maracas, by harmonicas, and bartenders, entire audiences, as Mike said, and we've been heckled by
drunken rugby teams.
Yeah, folk singer audiences, and so that's one of the things that you probably don't realize if you're not doing comedy, is that stand-up comedian is actually listening to you. He's listening to you respond to what he prepared, because we're comic nerds, and like when some of you guys tell jokes to me, I don't fall over laughing. I just say, yeah, that's a good one. I would use that, And it's you can't it's hard to make a comic laugh.
Yeah.
And if you've seen Jerry Seinfeld on Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, you've seen that fake thing he does, right?
Yeah.
The fake bow,
right.
And he's not really laughing. It's just being polite because he's heard. When you get used to writing jokes, and I want to ask you about that in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
When you get used to writing humor, you can see the punchline coming over the cliff.
Yep.
So you try really hard not to signal that, but comics can see it going.
Yeah.
And there's a thing called a flim flam, where okay, I know Steve's leading up to he's going to say a flim flam, or one of my jokes I like to use about you is like, I talked to Steve today and he didn't mention Bigfoot, and Mike's like, you didn't mention Bigfoot. I'm like, not yeti, right? And I'm glad we had some, we're able to Loch Ness some time down, for you. So those are the only two jokes I have. So what do you think? What were your thoughts on, preparing comedy?
Again, it was a lot more work than I imagined it ever would be. I mean, as you mentioned, I come from a fiction writing background, so I'm kind of used to writing short stories and novels and different things. But so when I first started, I thought, a joke, premise, setup, and a punchline, 3 parts, must be easy, right? 10 minutes can't be all that hard, but what I found was, for me to prepare 10 minutes requires at least 3 weeks,
right.
Which includes, reading, writing, practicing, recording, and then going back and editing and polishing. And even then, with 10 minutes of preparation, or 3 weeks of preparation for 10 minutes, and then get up on stage, and half the time it, maybe 50% goes over and the other 50% bombs. So a lot more work than I imagined, than I figured.
Well, as I mentioned before to you guys, like we had a really bad time once in November. We had a really bad show. But, when I looked back at it, I'm like, that was not even the worst good show that I had in the States. I've had, we still have not had a bad show. That wasn't a bad show. That was just a very raucous crowd.
Yeah.
But, nobody... we had a drunk guy banging, cymbals during my set and stuff like that. But nobody threw stuff at us. And I've had gigs where people have thrown stuff at us in the States. And I had a joke about the gay community. So I was performing for an all black crowd, and I got up and my premise was, there's a lot of gay people around here. And some black guy goes, you look like one of them. Okay, well, scratch that joke. My next joke is about hockey. Any hockey players in the audience? Hockey. We're going to talk about next golf. Actually, that was my next on my set. So the lesson I learned is know your audience.
Yeah. Well, I think there's that famous clip of Bill Burr. I think it was a show he did in Philadelphia.
Right.
And he was pretty famous at that point, and yet he was still getting stuff thrown at him, and now he's like one of the most famous comedians in the world. So again, if it happens to the pros, obviously now and again it's going to happen to, especially guys like us that are kind of like me that are just sort of starting out. So.
And sometimes, in my opinion, I haven't seen any of you guys bomb yet. You tell a bomb is actually, you tell a joke, it's total silence, and then people laugh at you because you told us, because now you look like an idiot.
Right.
And then you've lost their respect. Yeah. Now they're talking. This actually did happen to us at Coat of Arms. I've got to play the legendary audio sometime. But you can hear when we lost the audience. Yeah. And it just, that chatter, it just goes back up. It's just like you're at a cafeteria. It's like I'm not there. Yeah. And that's when you lose the audience. Right. So a real bomb is when you lose the audience. What I found is a couple of times I was at, I think it was Koala Cafe, and Miles was in the audience. And Miles got the joke, and he goes, you're too smart for us. You have to dumb down your jokes more. Yeah. Because I told some really funny jokes, but people are like, well, I don't get that. Because if you don't know about Chinese girls and how their birth is discouraged in China, you don't get my joke that I just told. And so, read a newspaper, people. So you have to know, or, I heard Yahoo and Google might even have some news now and then. Yeah. So you have to check I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not always your fault.
Right.
But it's still your responsibility. It's not your fault they didn't get it. You just told the wrong joke to the wrong audience. Yeah. But we don't have a way to check that until we're on stage, so it's really not our fault either.
Right, yeah.
But that's how you learn.
I like to say I'm dumb but curious, and so, constantly reading newspapers or whatever. And so sometimes I'll one of the things, the problems I run into on stage is I'll tell a joke, and the initial joke and punchline doesn't get a laugh, and then I have a follow-up tag,
right.
And then because I've memorized my set, I'll have to go into the next joke, and obviously that's not going to work either because the initial joke that was supposed to set up the tag didn't work. And so sometimes I'll have maybe a whole 2 or 3 minutes of jokes that we're supposed to build on the initial joke that don't work. And that's another thing I'm still learning is, if the initial joke of your set bombs,